title of the article is Origen, Eusebius, and the Accidental Interpolation in Josephus, Antiquities Jews 20.200.
The reason why I'm hung up on this one is because James, who's called the brother of who was called the Christ.
Well, when you say James, don't confuse that with James, the brother of Jesus. We're talking about who is this James being referred to in Josephus? Is this the brother of Jesus from Christian tradition, or could this just be James, the brother of Jesus Ben Ananias? And so the whole reason this James is even mentioned is because all this political machination going on leads to Jesus Ben Ananias becoming the next priest or high priest. Like I say, the argument is him called the Christ, that little bit in the original Greek, that was a marginal note or an accidental insertion. If that was not their original, then in Josephus it talks about James, the brother of Jesus, and then who is this Jesus? It's this Jesus Ben Ananias. First off, in terms of vocabulary, outside of all this Jesus stuff, where else is the word Christ used in the entirety of Josephus? If we want to talk about other things that are a bit peculiar, so first off, using this title where Josephus never explains it anywhere else, that already is kind of weird. So on that so-called Christ business, because that particular phrase is exactly what you see in the Gospel of Matthew used by the narrator to talk about Jesus, him called the Christ. Now, Matthew is not calling Jesus so-called, but yet that exact phrase you're finding in Josephus. So when you see a gospel phrase in Josephus, you should at least pause and wonder why. Is people will point to there being something about Jesus in Josephus by citing Origen, because Origen seems to suggest that Josephus says something about Jesus, which would then say, hey, there's something here before Eusebius mucks things up. And that would be a reasonable argument. But the thing is, when Josephus is talking about this, and he's talking about James, the brother of Jesus, and the description he gives of this doesn't match actually what we see in Josephus. He talks about this person basically being killed in a very different way, and that this brought on the onslaught of the Romans right after. There's things that we don't find in Josephus, but we find in a different source well after Josephus. It looks like from Hegesippus. There's two things to note though. One, the description that Origen provides for this James passage doesn't match what we see in Josephus, but it does match what we see in Hegesippus.
But it kind of does. It kind of does though.
But no, it doesn't. Because, for example, it talks about James being pushed off the temple and things like that. That's not what you find in Josephus.
But you expected to copy it word for word? I don't know what you're trying to say.
I'm saying he's saying things that aren't in Josephus at all.
Like what?
That, for example, the way James was killed was by being, thrown off the temple. You don't find that in Josephus, but you do find it in Hegesippus.
This is textexcavation.com. It says, but James is the one whom Paul says he saw in the epistle of the Galatians, saying, I do not see any of the apostles except James, brother of the Lord. And in such a way among the people did this James shine for his justice that Flavius Josephus, who wrote Judaic, he's even talking about what book? In 20 books, wishing to demonstrate the cause why the people suffered such great things, that even the temple was raised down, said that these things come to pass them in accordance with the ire of God on account of the things which were dared by them against James, brother Jesus, who was called Christ. That's exactly what Josephus says right there.
Well, where does it say in Josephus that the temple was destroyed because of what happened to James? Well, that's what Origen, though, is claiming Josephus says. And nowhere does Josephus say the temple was destroyed or the Romans attacked because of what happened to James. That doesn't appear in Josephus at all. But again, what does Josephus say was the cause of the temple being destroyed? Does he say James was the reason? No, he does not. All that it says is James was killed illegally, and because of that, the old high priest was kicked out and the new high priest came in.
Right, okay.
So nothing about why the temple was raised. Here's the thing. The reason I'm saying that is these sorts of things about James being killed and then the destruction of the temple happening, that is in Hegesippus.
Right.
And the fact that this James is being called the just, you don't find that as well anywhere in Josephus, but you do find it in Hegesippus. In the late 2nd century, yeah. Josephus, go to Antiquities, it says nothing about James being just or righteous or innocent. Meaning that Origen is saying, Josephus is saying, the reason the temple was destroyed was because of what happened to James. That is not in Josephus. Therefore, Origen is wrong. He is citing someone else. And the thing is, Hegesippus does say these sorts of things. He does talk about James being the just, being the brother of Jesus, dying a terrible death. And because of that terrible death, then suddenly the Romans attack the temple. That's all in Hegesippus. It's not in Josephus. That's why it looks more plausible. What Origen is talking about is a different text, because what he says matches a different text than what he cites. In the same sort of way, in the Gospels, sometimes Mark will cite a prophet, but he gives the name wrong. These mistakes happen. Which is actually also an interesting thing that you notice, because actually this gets to something else a bit interesting. Josephus also talks about John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Now, when Origen cites Josephus on John the Baptist, he says Origen talks about John the Baptist in book 18.
Yeah, right here. John, is this the one Josephus says to John, having been a Baptist, promised cleansing to those who were baptized?
Oh yeah, and right there at the beginning, it says in his 18th volume of Antiquities of the Jews, he talks about John the Baptist. Yep, that's a reasonable, good citation. Now notice though, he actually cites the exact book of Antiquities of the Jews. Origen doesn't actually cite where in Antiquities of the Jews there's this whole James passage. For some reason, Origen doesn't know where it is in this book. Why is it that he could find it for John the Baptist, but now he can't find it for James?